me. Let it rain, let it rain, let it rain. We have prayed that you would have mercy. We have prayed that you would have mercy. We believe from heaven you've heard. Heal our land, so dry and so thirsty.
Goodness gracious me! You've never seen anything like it. It was a steaming hot, sticky, sunny day, and there were thousands and thousands of people all pushing and shoving, trying to get to the front so that they could see what was happening. You must know what it's like being in a big crowd and you can't see because of the big tall people in front of you. People tried to push to the front to see what was going on. And let me tell you, what they saw that day, they would never forget their entire life. Goodness gracious me! There was the king, Ahab. He was dressed in his royal robes, I would think, and he must have looked very grand and very fine, and everybody would be glad to meet the king. But that's not who they'd come to see. They hadn't come to see the king. And there were the soldiers standing straight and tall, looking very smart in their uniforms. And everybody likes to see a soldier on parade. But that wasn't who the people had come to see either. And also, there were the priests of Baal, 450 of them. I would imagine on that day they would want to look very impressive too. So they would likely be dressed in their very religious robes, looking very holy and saintly, because they wanted to impress the people with how important they were. But it wasn't the priests that the people had come to see either. And then there was somebody else standing there. It was Elijah. He was standing there in his old camel skin coat. And it was kind of a coat I don't think he'd even sell or give to one of those charity shops. He was standing there in his old camel skin. But he was the one the people had come to see. They'd been waiting for 3.5 years for this day. 3.5 years in which it hadn't rained and the ground was dry, the crops had died, animals had died, so that when they saw Elijah they thought, this is when we'll find out just what is happening. Elijah held up his hand and the people became very, very quiet. There was a hush went over the entire crowd as Elijah stepped forward to speak. And as he stepped forward and spoke, I think the people would take a step back and gasp at what he said. When are you people going to make up your mind who you're going to serve? All these years, you couldn't make up your mind. One day you wanted to serve the Lord God, and the next day you wanted to serve these false prophets, these false gods, the false ones, Baals. And they're not really gods at all. When are you going to make up your mind who you're going to serve? Well, goodness gracious me, today we'll find out just who it is that you should be serving. And that's when Elijah made his challenge. He called the prophets of Baal forward next and he said, you prophets of Baal, I'm here all on my own standing for God against all you prophets of Baal. And today I'm going to make you a challenge to prove who is the one true God. Bring 2 bulls forward, Elijah said. And the people looked at each other kind of strange. What on earth does he want 2 bulls for? But they must have found 2 bulls and brought them forward. And Elijah said, now, you prophets of Baal, you can have a bull and I'll have a bull. And we'll both build an altar. We'll sacrifice the bull on top of the altar, but don't light a fire under the altar, under the sacrifice. don't light the fire, and then we'll ask the God who is the true God to send fire down to burn up the sacrifice, and then we'll show which one of us has the true God. And the people said, well, rock on, Tommy. Good idea, son. I like that idea, Elijah. I think that sounds really good. That's sound as a pound, Elijah. Let the competition begin to find out who is the true God. Well, the prophets of Baal, I think, would feel very, very confident too, because they believed that their Baal God was the God of the sun, and if anyone could send fire down, it would be the God of the sun, Baal. But we know, goodness gracious me, Baal didn't even exist. So, here they were. The priests of Baal built their altar, and I think they probably want to build it quite big so everybody could see what was going to happen. This was going to be a very special day. They built their altar, and I think it would look a very fine altar too. They killed the bull, they got the wood, put it on the altar. They killed the bull and made the sacrifice onto the altar, but they didn't light the fire. They had to get their god Baal to send fire down, so they began to pray to their god. And I think they probably begin like this because they wanted to look very religious and very impressive, so they wanted to look very holy. And I think they begin like this, oh Baal, please send fire down out of heaven, oh Baal, please. Well, they'd been praying something like that for about half an hour, and guess what happened? Nothing. Oh, goodness gracious me, what did you expect to happen? They prayed for a whole hour, for 2 hours, for 3 hours, and as they prayed more and more, they wanted to get very sincere about their prayers, very earnest, and they prayed and prayed hard to their god Baal. Oh Baal, please, please send fire down out of heaven. Oh, go on, please Baal, send fire down out of heaven. But nothing happened. They began to get so anxious that Baal wasn't answering their prayers. The Bible said they began to dance round and jump on the altar, and they were getting very, very excited and earnest that Baal was sent fire. Well, he hadn't sent fire down after 3 hours, and Elijah was just standing there watching them. And he said, hey, he was making fun of them really. He said, hey, you prophets of Baal, listen, maybe your God has gone away somewhere on a journey, or maybe he's having a little nap. Maybe he's gone to the bathroom, or he might be having a conversation with somebody else. Maybe if you shouted a little bit louder, then he would answer you. Well, goodness gracious me, those prophets of Baal took Elijah seriously, and they began to shout even louder. They began to get more and more excited and earnest. In fact, the Bible said they got knives and began to cut themselves to show Baal how serious they were about their prayers. Well, they'd gone on for about 6 hours like this, praying hard as hard can be, and nothing had happened. So Elijah stepped forward and said, whoa, hold it, whoa, step back a minute. And Elijah stepped forward. All the people pushed and shoved and stretched forward to see what Elijah was going to do. Well, this is what Elijah did. You see, there used to be an altar on this Mount Carmel. There used to be an altar to God once before, but it had been broken down. So Elijah got 12 stones, 1 stone for each of the tribes of Israel, and he built an altar unto the Lord God. He got the wood, chopped it up and put it on top of his altar. He got his bull and killed the bull and cut it up and put it on the altar for a sacrifice to God. And then he dug a trench around the altar. And the people scratched their heads. What is he doing now? Why is he digging that trench around the altar? Okay, Elijah said, I want you guys to get 4 buckets and go down to the well and fill the 4 buckets up with water. Well, they went down, well. They went down to the well and they got 4 buckets of water, and Elijah said, okay, pour the water over the sacrifice, over the altar. So they poured the 4 buckets of water over the altar, and it was soaking wet. And Elijah said, okay, go and get 4 more buckets of water. So they got 4 more buckets of water. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 more. 4, 5, 6, 7. That was 8 buckets of water poured all over the altar, and the water was beginning to run down the altar. It was soaking. And Elijah said, okay, now get 4 more buckets of water. So they went and they got 4 more buckets. That's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 4 more, 8, 9, 10, 11. 12 buckets of water they poured all over, and the water was even filling the trench. And then Elijah began to pray. And he prayed something like this: God, you are a gracious God. You are a good God. Show these people that you love them. Show these people that you want them to turn away from their sin. Show them that you alone are the true God. In a moment of time, goodness gracious, great balls of fire fell down out of heaven, and it burned up the sacrifice, it burned up the wood, it scorched the stones, and it even licked up the water that was in the trenches. Goodness gracious me! Now the people knew who the true God. The people all fell down on their faces saying, the Lord, He is the God. The Lord, He is the God. And just in that moment of time, the people had turned away from their sins. They'd come back to God to show God how sorry they were for all the wrong they did. But it shows you too how great God is. Goodness gracious, how God is so good and so gracious that He would forgive these people their sins, even though they've done such terrible things by turning their back on God. Well, what about Ahab? As far as the Bible's concerned, it doesn't seem to have affected Ahab at all. Elijah said to Ahab, Ahab, go back to your tent and get something to eat, because I can hear the sound of abundance of rain. The rain's coming, Ahab. Well, Ahab, he looked around, and all he could see was blue skies, not a cloud in the sky. Rain? I don't think so, Elijah. I can hear it. Elijah said, well, I can't, said the king. But Elijah didn't mean he could actually hear it. He knew in his heart that God would answer his prayer, and he was so sure that God would answer his prayer that it was as if he could actually hear the rain falling there and then. Well, that was the end for the priests of Baal. But wait until Jezebel finds out what happens. That'll be another story altogether. The king went back to his tent for something to eat, but Elijah had still something to do. He'd come back for one purpose. That was to show the people who God was, that God had promised to send rain. So Elijah climbed up the mountain, got to the very top of the mountain, and he got down on his knees. And he began to pray, not like those priests of Baal prayed. He just prayed earnestly for God, saying something like this: God, you are a faithful God. You promised to send rain. So God, I ask you now, please, to send the rain. Now, Elijah had his servant with him, and he said to his servant, listen, go up to the very top of the mountain and look out over the sea, and come back and tell me what you can see. So the servant went up, and he came back to Elijah and said, Elijah, I can't see anything. There's not a sign of a cloud. There's not a cloud in the sky. Well, Elijah wasn't going to give up that easy. Do you know, when you pray, you don't give up that easy just because God doesn't answer your prayer first time, every time. Elijah was so confident that God would answer his prayer. He believed God so much, he was just going to go on praying. He said to his servant, go back up the mountain and look out over the sea. Well, he did that 7 times. 7 times the servant went up, looked out, couldn't see a thing. But on the 7th time he came back, he said, Elijah, I can see something. Way in the distance, there's a cloud, but it's only the size of a man's hand. It's only a tiny, tiny cloud. Ho, ho, said Elijah. It may look small, but that's God answering our prayers. Listen, tell the king to get in his chariot and get back to the city of Jezreel quickly, because the rain is going to come pouring down. It will chuck it down. So the servant went and told King Ahab. He got in his chariot, and just as quickly as that, within a few minutes, the sky had got full of dark black clouds, and in just a few minutes the rain was pouring down. It was bouncing off the ground. The king got in his chariot, and he was ready to drive back to Jezreel, the city where he lived. It was about 20 miles away, so he was going to get really wet. In the meantime, Elijah pulled his coat round him, and the Spirit of God gave Elijah such power that he was able to run in front of Ahab's chariot on the way back to Jezreel, all that 20 miles. In those days, the person who ran in front of the chariot was somebody who had a message, and Elijah had a message to tell the people. Goodness gracious, did he have a message. He had a message of the goodness and graciousness of God, and he was going back to Jezreel to tell the people that God is the only God. He's good, he's gracious, and he's great. But there was another storm coming, a different one to that rainstorm, another storm that Elijah would have to face. A storm in which Jezebel would get so angry that even Elijah would get scared at what was about to happen. A storm was about to break because of Jezebel's anger against Elijah. And next week I'll tell you about that terrible, terrible storm and how it made even Elijah feel afraid. But goodness gracious me, our God is a great big God, a God full of love and forgiveness for you and for me. There is no God